The wagon had not stopped for her. It had slowed, the driver leaning over to spit tobacco juice into the dust, and he had told her this was as far as her coin had carried her. She had climbed down with her carpetbag in one hand and her grandmother's shawl wrapped twice around her shoulders, and she had watched the wheels roll on without her until they were only a smudge of brown against the heat shimmer of the prairie. That had been 3 days ago, or perhaps 4. Mercy had lost count somewhere between the dry creek bed and the second night she had slept beneath a juniper with her bag for a pillow. She had walked because there was nothing else to do. She had walked because the alternative was to sit down in the dirt and let the sun finish what her stepfather had started. When she came over the last rise and saw the gate, she did not believe it at first. The sun was behind her, low and red, and the gate stood at the end of a packed earth road that ran between two split-rail fences. Beyond the gate stretched a yard, a long barn with a shingled roof, a ranch house of weathered timber with a porch that wrapped two sides, and a paddock where horses moved in the dying light. She had heard 2 towns back that a man named Holt ran the best string of horses west of the Bighorns. She had heard he sometimes hired women for the house. She had heard he did not turn people away hungry. She had heard a great many things. Most of them had not been true. The dust was thick on her boots and thicker on her skirt, and her lips had cracked sometime during the afternoon. She stood at the gate with one hand on the top rail and looked across the yard, and she did not know what she meant to do. Knock, ask, beg, perhaps, if it came to that. She had not begged yet. She did not want today to be the first day. A man came out of the barn with a coil of rope over his shoulder, and he stopped when he saw her. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and even from where she stood, she could see the set of his jaw and the way he held himself, like a man who expected the world to give him a reason and was rarely disappointed. He wore no hat, and his dark hair had been pushed back by a forearm at some point in the recent past. His shirt was open at the throat. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back because she had no strength left for anything else. "Gate's not locked," he said. His voice carried across the yard without him raising it. It was a voice that did not need to be raised. She lifted the latch and pushed the gate open and stepped through onto his land, and she let the gate swing shut behind her with the small hollow knock of wood on wood. She walked the length of the road with her bag bumping against her thigh and her shawl slipping from one shoulder, and when she stopped in front of him she had to look up because he was taller than she had judged from the gate. "I am looking for work," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she had meant it to. She had not used it in 2 days. He looked at her, at the dust on her face, at the cracked lips, at the carpetbag, and the shawl, and the boots that had seen better roads. He did not look at her the way men in towns looked at women alone. He looked at her the way a man looks at a horse that has come a long way and is still standing. "What kind of work?" "Any kind." He was quiet a moment. From inside the barn she could hear hooves striking wood and a man's voice raised in something that was not quite anger and not quite fear. Holt's eyes flicked toward the sound and back to her. "You eaten today?" "No, yesterday." She had to think about it a little. He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he already knew, and he turned his head and called toward the house. "Lottie, bring a plate to the porch." A woman's voice answered from inside. He looked back at Mercy and gestured toward the porch with 2 fingers, and she followed him because her legs had begun to shake and she was not certain how much longer they would hold her. The porch was shaded and the boards were swept clean. He pointed at a bench and she sat, and the relief of being off her feet was so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. She turned her head so he would not see them. A woman came out of the house carrying a tin plate with cold cornbread and a slice of ham and a wedge of yellow cheese and a cup of water that she set down on the bench beside Mercy without saying a word. The woman looked at her once, took in everything in a glance the way women on the frontier learn to do, and went back inside. "Eat," Holt said. She ate. She tried not to eat too fast. He stood at the porch rail with his back to her and his arms folded along the top of it, looking out at the paddock. And he did not watch her eat. She was grateful for that. When she had finished the cornbread and most of the ham and drunk the water, she set the plate on the bench beside her and folded her hands in her lap. Thank you. He turned then. You got a name. Mercy. Mercy what? She hesitated. She did not want to give the second name. She did not know yet how far the second name had carried. He watched her hesitate and did not press. Mercy is enough for now, he said. I am Emmett Holt. This is my land. She nodded. You ride. Yes, how well, well enough. He almost smiled. It did not reach his mouth, but something near his eyes shifted. Where did you come from? Mercy. East? East is a wide country. It is. He let that sit. From the barn, the sound came again, hooves on wood. And this time the voice that answered was sharper. Holt's jaw tightened. He looked toward the barn, and then, back at her, and he seemed to decide something. You sit there until you can stand up without falling down. Then come find me. I have a problem you cannot fix, but I am running out of people to ask. He stepped down off the porch and walked toward the barn, and she watched him go. His stride was long and easy. He walked like a man who had walked a great deal of land in his life, and expected to walk a great deal more. She sat on the bench and listened to her own breathing and the small wind through the eaves, and she felt the food settle in her stomach, like a stone, that had decided to become warm. After a long time, she stood. Her legs held her. She left the carpet bag on the bench and walked toward the barn. The smell hid her before the sound. Hay and horse and leather and the sharp, clean sting of fresh manure. And under it all, the bitter copper smell of something afraid. She stopped in the wide doorway and let her eyes adjust. 4 stalls down the right side, 3 down the left, a center aisle of swept earth. In the 3rd stall on the right, a stallion was moving. He was big. 16 hands at the withers, maybe more, and built, heavy, through the chest. His coat was a dark blood bay, almost black where the shadow took him, and his mane had been braided once, and was now coming undone in pieces. His eyes showed white at the edges. He was not rearing, not striking, but he could not stand still. His weight shifted from one front hoof to the other, in a rhythm that had no rhythm, and his ears were back tight against his skull. And every few seconds a tremor would run down his shoulder like a wind across water. 2 men stood at the stall door. One was Holt, the other was older, gray at the temples, with a face the sun had worked on for 40 years. He has been like this since the storm, the older man was saying. Will not let me near the off shoulder, will not eat more than a handful. Bridger came down from the upper pasture this morning and he tried to take the head off him. Has he been bleeding? Not that I can see, but there is something. He is favoring it. Holt was quiet. He stood with one hand on the top board of the stall and watched the horse move, and his face was the face of a man who is trying to keep something out of his voice. Mercy stepped closer. Neither of them noticed her at first. The stallion did. His head came up, and the white showed brighter in his eyes, and his nostrils flared, and he turned to face her across the bars of the stall. She stopped. Get back from there. The older man's voice was sharp. He will go through that door if you give him a reason. Mercy did not move back. She did not move forward either. She stood where she was, and she let her shoulders fall, and she let the breath go out of her slowly, and she looked at the horse without looking at his eyes. She looked at his shoulder, at the line of his neck, at the place behind his elbow where the trembling was worst. The stallion did not stop moving, but the rhythm of his shifting changed. It slowed. His ears came forward an inch. Easy, Mercy said. It was not a word for him. It was a word for the room. Easy now. She took one step slow. Then another. Holt had turned to watch her and he had not spoken. And the older man had drawn a breath to speak and Holt had lifted one finger and the older man had not spoken. She stopped at the stall door. The stallion was watching her, his head was lowered slightly now, and his nostrils worked at the air, taking in the smell of her, the dust and the sweat, and the long road. She did not lift her hand. She let it rest on the top board of the stall, palm up, fingers loose. She looked at the floor of the stall. "You been carrying something," she said. Quiet. The voice she had used as a girl on the back step of her grandmother's house when the barn cats came in from the cold. "You been carrying something a while." The stallion blew out through his nose. A long, shuddering breath. He took one step toward her, then another. He brought his head down and pressed his muzzle against the bars of the stall, and she felt the heat of his breath on her wrist. She lifted her hand. Slow. She did not reach for his head. She reached for the place on his shoulder where the trembling was, and she laid her palm flat against the bars in line with it, and she held it there. He stilled. For the first time since she had walked into the barn, the stallion stood still. The tremor in his shoulder went out of him like water draining from a cup. His ears came forward. His head dropped. Another 2 inches. He stood with his muzzle against the bars, and his eye half closed, and his great chest rising and falling slowly. And Mercy held her hand against the wood, and did not move, and did not speak. The silence in the barn went on for a long time. It was the older man who broke it. He breathed out a word she did not catch, and then he said, more clearly, "I have been working horses 50 years. Holt did not answer him. He was looking at her. She felt his look without turning her head. It was not the look of a man who had been impressed. It was the look of a man who had been struck by something he did not understand and did not yet know whether to trust. She kept her hand against the wood. She kept her eyes on the stallion's shoulder. "What is his name?" she said. "Bridger named him Cinder," Holt said. "Before any of us knew what he would be. He has been hurt." "Where?" "Not where you have been looking." She tilted her head a fraction, indicating. "Lower, behind the elbow. Something is pressing on him there. It is not a wound. It is something underneath." The older man swore under his breath. "Can you get to him?" "Not today," she said. "Not the way he is. Tomorrow, maybe. If he remembers me, he will remembers me. He will remember you." She did not know how he could be so certain. She did not ask. She took her hand off the bars and stepped back, and the stallion lifted his head and watched her go, but he did not start his shifting again. He stood where she had left him, and his ears stayed forward, and after a moment he reached down and took a mouthful of hay from the corner of the stall, and began slowly to chew. The older man laughed. It was a short sound, half disbelief, half something else. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his gray hair and put the hat back on. "Well," he said, "well, I will be damned." Holt was still looking at her. She followed him out of the barn, into the yard. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, and the light had gone the color of old brass, and the cottonwoods by the creek stood black against it. He walked her as far as the porch and stopped at the foot of the steps, and turned. "You have a place to sleep tonight." "No, there is a room behind the kitchen," was the cook's, before she married a homesteader and left. "Lottie will show you. It is clean. There is a door that locks from inside." She looked at him. He had said the last part deliberately, and he had said it without looking away from her, and she understood that he had taken in more about her at the gate than she had thought. "Thank you, I am not finished. You will work for your keep. You will help in the house, and you will come to the barn when I send for you. We will see what you can do with that horse. If you can do what I think you can do, there is more work here than I have hands for. If you cannot, you will still have eaten and slept, and you can ride out in the morning on a horse that is not yours to keep but is yours to use, until you reach a town. Is that fair?" "That is more than fair. It is what is fair." He paused. "What is your second name, Mercy?" She had known he would ask again. She had not decided yet what to say. "Ainsworth," she said. It was her mother's name. It was not the name on any paper that might be looking for her. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth, either. He nodded. Ainsworth then. Lottie will fetch you when supper is on. He went back to the barn. She watched him go, and she stood for a moment at the foot of the steps with her hand on the rail, and she felt the strangest thing she had felt in months. A small, still place inside her chest, like a hand laid flat against a trembling shoulder. She slept that night in a narrow bed, in a room that smelled of flour and dried sage, and the door locked from inside, and she did not dream. In the morning, she woke before light. She lay for a moment in the dark, trying to remember where she was, and when she remembered, she got up. She dressed in the same dust-stained dress, because it was the only one she had, and she went to the kitchen and found Lottie already there, with a fire going and biscuits cut on a board. "You ever made biscuits?" Lottie said. She did not look up. "Yes, make them. Mine never rise right, and Mr. Holt has not said anything about it. But he ate 3 at a sitting last week, and that man only eats 3 of something when he has stopped tasting it." Mercy washed her hands and rolled up her sleeves and took the dough and worked it with the heel of her hand, and Lottie watched her out of the corner of an eye and did not comment. When the biscuits were in the iron, and the iron was over the coals, Lottie poured 2 cups of black coffee and set one on the table in front of Mercy and sat down opposite her with the other. "Where did you come from?" "East." "East is a wide country." It was a near echo of what Holt had said, and Mercy looked up, and Lottie almost smiled. "He asked you the same, did he?" "He did. He notices things." Lottie sipped her coffee. "He does not say much, but he notices. You walked in here yesterday, looking like death had been chasing you, and he gave you the cook's room. He has not given that room to anyone in 2 years. Who had it before?" Lottie was quiet a moment. "His wife's sister. Crate. Came out from St. Louis after the funeral, stayed 6 months, and went back. Could not bear the quiet." Mercy looked into her coffee. "He had a wife. He had a wife and a boy. Both went in the same winter. Scarlet fever took the boy, and she went after. Of grief mostly, though the doctor called it something else. He has not said either of their names in 3 years that I know of. He works. He builds. He buys more land. He breaks horses. He does not drink, which is something, but he is alone, in a way that frightens me, and I have known him since he was 20. Mercy did not ask what year that had been. She did not need to. "The Stallion," she said. "Cinder." "How long has he been like that?" "Since the storm. 2 weeks now. He was the boy's favorite, before Mr. Holt raised that horse from a colt and gave him to the boy. After the boy went, Mr. Holt put him out to pasture and would not look at him. Brought him back in this spring, because Bridger thought he could be made into something. Bridger is a good hand, but he is not a soft hand. The horse has not let anyone close in a year." Mercy said nothing. She was thinking about a hand on a stall bar and a tremor going out of a shoulder. "He let you close?" Lottie said. "It was not a question. He did. Then you had better stay." The biscuits came out of the iron golden and high, and Lottie looked at them and shook her head and said something under her breath about a woman who could make biscuits like that, walking in off the trail, and Mercy almost laughed. It had been a long time since she had almost laughed. Holt came in from the yard while they were eating. He took off his hat at the door and hung it on the peg, and washed his hands at the basin, and sat down at the head of the table without speaking. Lottie put a plate in front of him. He looked at the biscuits. "These are not yours, Lottie." "They are not." He looked at Mercy. He did not say anything. He ate 2 of them, with butter and a spoonful of honey from a clay jar, and then he ate a third, and then he drank his coffee and stood. "Come to the barn when you are finished," he said. "Bring water in a tin pail, cold." She came to the barn with the pail. The morning sun was just over the ridge, and the dust in the yard was still damp from the night, and the air smelled of wood smoke and sage. Holt was standing at Cinder's stall and the stallion was standing at the bars, looking out at the aisle, and his ears came forward when she stepped through the door. She set the pail down at her feet. "What do you need?" Holt said. "I need you to leave us. Stand at the door if you want. But not where he can see you." He did not argue. He walked to the wide doorway and stood with his back to a post, looking out at the yard, and he did not turn around. She went to the stall. She did not open the door. She put her hand on the top board where she had put it the day before, and she let the breath go out of her, slowly, and she spoke to the horse in the low voice her grandmother had used with the cats. "You remember me?" He blew out through his nose. He brought his head down and pressed his muzzle against the bars, and she felt his breath on her wrist again. Warmer this morning, less ragged. "I am going to come in. I am going to look at your shoulder. You can stop me if you need to, but I do not think you will." She lifted the latch. The hinges did not creak. Holt's hinges did not creak. She had noticed the whole barn was kept the way a man keeps a barn when the barn is the last thing he has, and she stepped through into the straw and closed the door behind her. The stallion did not move. He stood with his head lowered and his eyes half closed, and he let her come to him. She put one hand on his neck. He did not flinch. She slid the hand down along the line of his shoulder, slow, slow, and when she came to the place behind his elbow, he shivered once, hard, and then was still. She crouched. She felt with her fingertips along the underside of the muscle. There was a hard lump under the skin, no bigger than the end of her thumb, and around it the flesh was hot. She did not know what it was. A burr that had worked its way under during the storm, an old wound that had closed over a splinter. A growth. Something that would have to come out either way. She stood. The stallion turned his head and looked at her, and she stroked his neck once and stepped back, and he watched her open the stall door and go through it and close it behind her. She walked to the doorway. Holt was where she had left him. "There is something under the skin behind his elbow," she said, "about the size of a pea. The flesh around it is hot. He has been favoring it because it hurts when the shoulder moves. And the more the shoulder moves, the more it festers, and that is why he cannot stand still. The pain comes back fresh every time he shifts his weight. He has not been able to rest." Holt turned. He looked at her for a long moment. "Can you take it out?" "I think so. I have done it before. Not on a horse. On a child once. On myself. Twice. It is a small cut and a quick pull, and then a poultice and a few days of rest. I will need clean water, a clean knife, lye soap, and any of the following: yarrow, comfrey, plantain leaf. If you have none of those, I can walk the creek and find them, but not today. Today he needs to know me better. Tomorrow I will cut." He nodded. He did not say good. He did not say thank you. He said, "I have yarrow in the kitchen. Lottie keeps it. Comfrey grows along the creek bank a quarter mile south. I will send Bridger for plantain. I will go for the comfrey myself. He should not be the one who fetches it. He frightens the horse." Holt almost smiled again. Bridger frightens a great many things, and most of them ought to be frightened. But you are right. He watched her another moment. Then he said, quieter, "Where did you learn this?" "My grandmother. She birthed half the children in our county and pulled splinters out of the other half. She taught me what she knew before she died. And the horses. The horses taught me themselves. We had two. They were what I had when I had nothing else. They listened. I listened back." He was looking at her in the way he had looked at her at the gate, like a man who had been struck by something he did not understand. She turned away from it because she did not know what to do with it. "I will go for the comfrey," she said. "I will be back before noon." She walked to the creek through the long grass, and the morning was clean and bright and full of birdsong, and she found the comfrey in a stand by the bank, with its broad green leaves and its blue-purple bellflowers, and she cut what she needed with the small knife Lottie had given her. On the way back she found yarrow too. just to be sure, and plantain along the path. She came into the yard with her apron full and her hands stained green. Bridger was leaning on the corral. He was a thick man with a beard, the color of rust, and small, hard eyes. And he watched her cross the yard, and he did not move out of her way when she came to the corral. She had to step around him. "You," the one talked to the horse. "I am. He kicked me twice last week, near broke my arm. He is afraid. He is mean. He is afraid. There is a difference." He looked at her. He did not like her. She had known the kind before, and she did not flinch from it. "You watch yourself, girl. He is not a pet. He is 1,000 pounds of mean. And he will go through you if you give him a reason. I will watch myself." She walked past him to the kitchen. She did not look back. She felt his eyes on her, between the shoulders the whole way. That afternoon, she sat in the cook's room and ground the herbs in a wooden bowl with the back of a spoon, and Lottie came in and watched her work for a while, and then sat down on the edge of the bed. "Bridger has been with Mr. Holt 9 years, Lottie said. "He is loyal and he is hard. And he does not like change. He does not like that you are here, I gathered. Just so you know, thank you." Then she said, "Mr. Holt does not look at women. Mercy." Mercy's hand stopped on the spoon. "He has not since his wife died. Women have come through. Widows from town, a schoolteacher's sister. A woman who passed through with the freight last spring and tried for a week to catch his eye. He looked at none of them. He was kind to all of them. I do not know what you are telling me. I am telling you that he looked at you twice this morning, and he ate 3 biscuits." Mercy did not answer. She bent over the bowl and ground the herbs. In the morning she went to the barn with the poultice in a clay jar, and the knife sharpened, and a strip of clean linen folded over her arm. Holt was waiting. So was Bridger. "Send him away," she said. Bridger's face went dark.
"Now you wait."
"Bridger." Holt's voice cut him off. "Wait at the corral. I will call you if I need you." Bridger went. He went slowly, and he looked at Mercy as he passed her, and she did not look back at him. When he was gone, she turned to Holt. "You stay at the door same as yesterday. He knows you. He is not afraid of you, but he does not trust you to be in here with me." "Why not?" "Because you smell like grief. Horses know. He carries the same thing you do, and he cannot bear to have it close, while I am working on him." Holt looked at her. Whatever he had been going to say, he did not say it. He went to the doorway, and he stood with his back to the post, and he did not turn around. She went into the stall. Cinder lowered his head to her. She stroked his neck and his shoulder, and she let her hand rest on the place behind his elbow until he had grown still under it, and then she crouched, and she took the knife from her apron, and she spoke to him in the low voice. "This will hurt for 1 second, and then it will be over. You can move if you need to. But it would be better if you did not." She made the cut. It was small and quick. The stallion shuddered once along his whole length, and then was still. She pressed with her thumb, and the thing came out, dark and ragged. A thorn that had been driven in deep and grown a hood of corrupted flesh around it. She held it in her palm a moment, then dropped it in the straw. She pressed the poultice against the cut and bound the linen around the leg, and tied it off, and she stood and ran her hand once down his neck. "There," she said. He blew out through his nose, a long, slow breath. He turned his head and pressed his muzzle against her shoulder, and stood like that, breathing against her, and she felt the weight of him lean into her, and she put her arms around the long line of his jaw, and held him. She did not know when she had begun to cry. Quiet tears, no sound, just water running down her face into his mane. She had not cried since her stepfather had put her out. She had not cried on the road. She had not cried when she had finished the last of her bread. On the second day, she had not cried at the gate. She cried now, against the neck of a horse, and the horse stood still and let her. When she came out of the stall, Holt was no longer at the doorway. He was at the corral fence, his back to the barn, his hands gripping the top rail. She walked past him to the house without speaking. He did not turn. The days went on. The cut healed clean. Cinder began to eat. By the end of the week, he would let Holt into the stall, and by the end of the second week, he would take a saddle, and by the end of the third, he carried Mercy at a walk around the corral with his ears forward and his head low. Holt watched from the fence and said nothing. Bridger watched from the barn door, and his face did not soften. She had moved through the work of the house in those weeks, like a woman who had been given back her hands. She baked, and she mended, and she scrubbed, and she rendered tallow into candles. And in the afternoons she went to the barn, and she worked the stallion, and in the evenings she sat on the porch, and she watched the sun go down over the ridge. Holt sat with her sometimes. He did not always speak. When he did, he spoke about the land, what grew where, what the cattle wanted, where the water ran high in spring. He did not ask her about her past. She did not offer. One evening he built her a shelf. She came back from the creek with an armful of comfrey and yarrow, and found him on the porch with a hammer and 3 planed boards, and he was setting brackets into the wall beside the kitchen door. He did not look up when she stopped at the foot of the steps. "For your jars," he said. "Lottie said you had nowhere to keep them." He did not say it warmly. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been thinking about and has finally done. She stood at the foot of the steps, with her arms full of green leaves, and she could not speak. When he was finished, he straightened and looked at the shelf and then at her. And then, because she was still standing there with her arms full, he came down the steps and took the bundle of herbs from her without quite touching her hands, and he carried it up to the porch and laid it on the bench, and he went back into the barn. She put her jars on the shelf that night. There were not many of them, 3, perhaps 4, but they looked like they belonged. The letter came on a Tuesday. Bridger brought it from town. He had been into the settlement for grain, and he came back with the mail folded into his vest pocket, and he laid it on the kitchen table without looking at Mercy, and he went back out. There were 2 pieces. One was a feed catalogue. The other was a folded sheet of cheap paper, sealed with a smear of black wax, addressed in a hand Mercy knew. She knew it before she had touched it. She knew it across the room. She stood at the table and looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. And when she picked it up, her hands were not steady. Lottie watched her. "Mercy, it is for Mr. Holt. It is for you. Look at it." She looked. The name on the paper was Mercy Ainsworth. The hand was her stepfather's. She had not given that name to anyone but Holt. She put the letter down on the table. She walked out of the kitchen and out of the house and across the yard to the barn, and she went into Cinder's stall, and she stood with her face pressed against his neck, and she did not move for a long time. When she came out of the barn, the sun was low, and Holt was waiting by the corral. He had the letter in his hand. He held it out to her. "This came for you. I know. I have not read it. I know." She did not take it. He waited. After a moment, he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. "Do you want to tell me?" She looked at him. She did not know how to begin. The whole shape of the thing rose up in her at once. Her mother's death, her stepfather's house, the way he had begun to look at her after the funeral, the way he had begun to come into her room at night to stand in the doorway and watch her pretend to sleep. The morning she had taken the money from the tin behind the flour and walked out before light. The long road, the wagons, the trail dust, the gate. She did not know how to begin. "My stepfather," she said. He did not touch me, but he was going to. I left before he could. I took money that was not mine. Not much. Enough for the stage to the river. He has been writing to settlements along the line, I think, asking after a girl with my description. I do not know how he knew I was here. I gave a different name in town when I came through." Bridger gave it. She looked up. "He gave your description in the settlement last week. He has been asking around about you. He did not know your stepfather was looking. He only wanted to know who you were, where you had come from." whether you could be trusted around the horses and around me. Why? Because he has been with me 9 years and he loves me like a brother, and he does not like that I have begun to look at you the way I have begun to look at you." She did not breathe. He took the letter from his pocket. He did not open it. He looked at it in his hand. "Your stepfather is coming," he said. "Or he is sending someone. The letter will say so. I do not need to read it to know. What will you do?" He looked at her. The brass light was on his face, and his eyes were the color of creek water in the evening, and his jaw was set the way it had been set the first day she had seen him at the barn door. "What do you want me to do, Mercy?" "I want you not to send me back." "I am not going to send you back. I want you not to put yourself in front of him for me. He is a hard man. He will bring law if he can." I took money. How much? $11. He almost laughed. It was the closest she had heard him come to laughing. $11. It was a great deal at the time. "I will pay him his $11 and I will tell him to ride out of my yard and never come back. And if he does not ride out, I will put him out." There is no law that will take a girl back to a man she ran from. Not in this territory. Not in my settlement. The judge is a friend of mine, and the sheriff owes me a favor that is older than you are. And if he comes anyway, then he comes anyway. She looked at him a long time. He looked back. Neither of them moved. "I have to leave," she said. "No, I have to leave. If I am gone when he comes, there is nothing for him to take back. He will have ridden 1,000 miles for nothing. He will turn around. He will not come back. And you, I will go further west. I will find another place." "No, Emmett." It was the first time she had said his name. He had not noticed she had said it, or he had noticed and was not going to show it. He took a step toward her and another, and he stopped close enough that she could see the dust on his collar and the place at his throat where the sun had burned him this summer. "You will not go further west. You will not go anywhere. You will stay here, in the room behind the kitchen, with the door that locks from inside. And when he comes, I will be at the gate, and Bridger will be at the gate beside me, because Bridger is my brother, and once I have told him what kind of man your stepfather is, Bridger will stand at that gate until his boots grow into the ground. And your stepfather will not pass it, not for $11, not for 11,000. She could not speak. "Do you understand me? Yes?" "Say it again." "Yes." He stood there a moment longer. Then he stepped back, and he put the letter back in his pocket, and he turned and walked toward the house. At the porch, he stopped and turned back. "Mercy." "Yes." "You did not take anything that was not owed you. $11 is not what was owed. He owes you a great deal more than that, and he will not pay it. And that is a thing you and I will both have to live with. But you owe him nothing. Do you hear me?" "I hear you." He went into the house. Her stepfather came 9 days later. He came on a bay gelding, with a man beside him on a mule, and the man on the mule wore a tin star that did not look quite official, and they stopped at the gate and called for the owner of the ranch. Holt was at the gate before they had finished calling. Bridger was at the gate beside him. Mercy stood at the kitchen window with Lottie's hand on her shoulder, and she watched. She could not hear what was said. She saw her stepfather lean forward on his saddle and gesture, and she saw Holt speak briefly, and she saw her stepfather's face change. She saw the man with the tin star say something, and she saw Bridger step forward, and she saw the man with the tin star think better of whatever he had been going to say. She saw Holt take a small leather pouch from his vest pocket and toss it underhand across the gate, and she saw her stepfather catch it because his hand had moved before he had thought about it. She saw Holt point back down the road. Her stepfather did not move. Holt said something else. Something longer. Her stepfather's face went the color of old meat, and his mouth opened, and Bridger took a step that was not quite a step toward the gate. And her stepfather closed his mouth, and he turned his horse, and the man with the tin star turned his mule, and they rode back down the road the way they had come. Holt stood at the gate until they were out of sight. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. She met him on the porch. She did not know what to say. He stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up at her. He is gone. Yes. He will not come back. No. She came down the steps. She stopped on the second step from the bottom, which put her face level with his. She had not planned this. She was not certain her legs would have carried her any further. Emmett. Mercy! I do not know how to thank you. Do not thank me. I have to thank you for something. He looked at her. His hand came up slow, and he touched the side of her face with the backs of his fingers, and he did not say anything for a long time. Then thank me by staying, he said. I am staying. Thank me by staying for a long time. I am. He leaned forward. He pressed his forehead against hers, and his hand stayed against her cheek, and they stood like that on the porch step with the brass light around them and the wind moving in the cottonwoods, and neither of them moved until Lottie came out of the kitchen and saw them, and went back inside without making a sound. He did not kiss her that day. He kissed her 3 days later, at the corral fence, after she had ridden Cinder at a slow canter for the first time, and brought him to a stop in front of him, and slid down into the dust beside him. He took her face in both hands, and he kissed her once, slowly, like a man who had been waiting a long time and meant to remember it, and then he rested his forehead against hers again, and he said her name, only her name. And that was enough. They were married in the spring, by a circuit preacher who came through the settlement once a month, and who did not ask for paper. Lottie stood beside her in a dress she had not worn in 20 years, and Bridger stood beside Holt with his beard combed and his eyes wet, which he denied for the rest of his life. Cinder was in the corral behind them, and he stood still through the whole of it, his ears forward, his great head over the rail watching. The settlement came out for the wedding. Some of them had whispered in the months before about the woman who had walked in off the trail and taken the rancher's heart, and some of them had said things to Lottie at the store that Lottie had not repeated to Mercy. But they came out for the wedding all the same, because Holt was Holt, and his word was good in that country, and because Mercy had set the broken arm of a homesteader's boy in February, when the doctor could not be found, and because she had ridden out in March with Comfrey and Yarrow for a woman who had lost a baby and had no one to sit with her. They came out, and they ate the food Lottie had cooked, and they danced in the yard until the moon was up over the ridge, and when they rode home knowing that the rancher had chosen well. In the years that came after there was a daughter, and then a son. The daughter had her father's eyes and her mother's hands, and she could quiet a horse before she was 4 years old. The son was named for no one in particular, because Holt had said he wanted a name that was only his, and Mercy had agreed. Cinder lived a long time. He carried both children in their turn on his back through the long grass, beside the creek, and when he died at last, he was buried under the cottonwood at the bend of the creek where the comfrey grew, and Holt dug the hole himself and would not let any of the hands help him. On summer evenings, Mercy sat on the porch with her husband and watched the sun go down over the ridge, and sometimes she thought about the woman who had stood at the gate covered in trail dust with her shawl slipping from her shoulders, and she did not quite recognize her. That woman had walked a long way to find this porch. That woman had not known that the road she was walking ended here. Mercy was glad she had not known. She thought she might not have had the courage if she had known what was waiting. She thought she might have sat down in the dust of some other road and never gotten up. The not knowing had carried her. The not knowing and a stubbornness her grandmother had given her, and a horse she had not yet met who had been waiting in a stall at the end of a road. Holt would reach across the bench sometimes and take her hand without speaking, and she would let him, and they would sit like that until the brass light was gone and the stars came out over the prairie and the wind moved in the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the paddock a horse blew through its nose and was answered by another die. And the porch of the ranch house was the warmest and stillest place she had ever known.